Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's event. I'm Sundar Katwala. I'm the Director of British Future and hosting this event, Why Windrush Matters Today, on behalf of the Windrush 75 network, which is a network of groups, including us and many others, who are interested in building the 75th anniversary of Windrush into a major national moment. We've got a whole year to achieve that, because tomorrow is Windrush Day. So you're joining us tonight on Windrush Eve, before many of you are involved in events and activities yourselves tomorrow in different places around the country. So this is a chance to think about what the Windrush story has meant historically, what it's coming to mean now. We've got the national monument being unveiled tomorrow morning, another phase in the greater recognition of Windrush. And so we'll be talking about what that means and what we do with it. We have an excellent panel to lead that discussion tonight. Reverend Michael King will introduce himself in a minute. He is a trustee of the Black Heroes Foundation. He is a descendant of Windrush. We all are in different ways, but he is in a very direct way a descendant of Windrush. His father, the late great Sam King, was one of the passengers and did a great deal to establish the Windrush story and to pass that story on. Have Patrick Vernon, an associate of British Future, among many other hats he wears, but he's been working on this story of Windrush for many years and is convening the Windrush 75 network. And we have Siobhan Aarons, who is a founder of CARF, Conservatives Against Racism and for Equality, and a trustee of the newly launched Black Equity organisation. So, Michael, I'd like to start with you. The story of Windrush has always been in your life and your personal history. More and more people know something about it now. What's its meaning and significance for us all, as you see it?
The significance, as I see it, is that the Windrush was the first vehicle to bring people of other hues, other colours, from the Caribbean to the UK. People think it's the start of immigration, but history is a strange animal. Being a man of God, I have to use biblical terminology. To know the truth, and the truth will make you free. Many people misquote it as set you free. It's make you free. Once you know something, it can't be taken away from you. And in the knowing of Windrush, the thing that's normally missed by people is that my father, as one of the travellers on the Windrush, amongst with the vast majority of men that were there, were ex-services personnel. They had fought for king and country in the Second World War, not king, queen and country, because it was George V, but they had volunteered in the Caribbean when in Britain people were conscripted. They had then made the North Atlantic crossing when 1 in 3 ships were being sunk by Nazi U-boats. So that's a brave act in itself, just to get to the theatre of war. And then they'd fought in the war. After the war, returned home, and the mother country had been destroyed. The mother country was still under rationing. The mother country was diminished by 250,000+ men. The manpower was missing. So they were called to help rebuild the mother country, not economic migrants. They were war veterans who were called to help rebuild the country that they had already fought for. So for me, Windrush has always been one of our heroes. I like the Americans, how they do it. They say to their military personnel, thank you for your service. I think we should be doing that. We should be saying to our original Windrushers, thank you for your service, because they came to rebuild places like Coventry that my father had told me the Germans had had 1,000 bomber raid and had absolutely flattened the place. And in fact, that's where we got the expression sent to Coventry. We knew we'd broken the Enigma code. We knew that they were coming, but we didn't tell our people. British High High Command were aware but didn't say. And so we were still sending little children off away from the Blitz in London up to Coventry, and it was flattened. Places like that needed rebuilding, and they came to rebuild on invitation and with the intention of not staying. These were war heroes returning to help the country. And I'll stop there. I could talk about it all day. That's a great foundation. And I'll talk about things like housing and problems that weren't had in the war. In the war, in a uniform, a black man couldn't walk into a pub and buy a drink. Everybody bought a drink. After the war was a little different because things had changed. The white, Aryan, blonde-haired, blue-eyed enemy was no more. And then this dark-skinned gentleman who was here supporting the country faced a thing called prejudice that really didn't happen in the same way during the war when he was in uniform. So we can talk about that afterwards. But for me, Windrush, very foundational in British history, in British immigration. They were not economic migrants. They were war heroes helping the UK to rebuild.
And that's, thank you. That's a very important part of the story because we talk of it. And of course, it is a symbolic foundation moment for the Black Caribbean story, the Black British story, post-war Commonwealth migration. We talk about it as a rival, but it's a return to Britain for many people. The Evening Standard headline was "Welcome Home" to the people on the ship because they were, as you say, RAF servicemen in large part. Patrick, this story, Michael's father, Sam King, did a great deal to, get Brixton, get Windrush Square in Brixton, and the Windrush Foundation was building up the anniversary, and it's been marked on as Windrush Day, and then it was adopted by the government as well. Partly in response to the scandal. It shouldn't have taken a scandal, but this is part of the response to the scandal. Where are we now, Patrick, with the recognition of Windrush, and what more do we want to see?
Okay, well, just first to acknowledge Michael and his late father, who I knew over the years, and he played a key role. He laid the foundations for Windrush Day, to be quite honest, because he kept in contact with quite a few of the passengers. I mean, even in his memoirs, at the back of his memoirs, he's got the list, the passenger ship list of the Windrush. So he maintained that contact. It was a very kind of vocal and visible presence around Windrush for many people. He was like their leader in many ways. And so when he organised the very first Windrush event in 1988 in Brixton, that laid the foundation for other Windrush Day events. And every decade, he and Arthur Torrington would organise significant events. I think the 50th anniversary, as you said, prior we came online, Sunday was quite important because the 50th anniversary, that's when you had a major TV series. I think it was a four-part TV series done by Mike and Trevor Phillips, and the book, Windrush is a Rise. And that laid, in many ways, that started that whole influence, definitely influenced me. I mean, and then I got involved a bit later on in terms of with the British Futures and others about the campaign for a National Windrush Day. Why can't we do it every year instead of waiting for every 10 years? So where we're at, obviously Theresa May, as a result of apologising for the scandal, adopted National Windrush Day, and ever since 2019, along with additional grant aid to support Windrush Day activities, it's been recognised. And I think I have to say, up and down the country, tomorrow there'll be hundreds, if not thousands, of events in our four nations doing kind of recognising the Windrush generation, its history, its contribution as well. So I think that's quite important. It's an important landmark. I mean, when I wrote this article some years ago on The Guardian to say that Windrush Day should be the equivalent of Martin Luther King Day, Labour Day. And so we're working towards that. And I know that the Reach Society, they see it as Burns Night and stuff like that. So everyone's doing different things, different ways to commemorate Windrush Day. Well, I think it's quite important. Obviously, we've got the unveiling of memorial at Waterloo Station tomorrow, and I'll be attending that. Also, Hackney Council, they'll be launching a second memorial to do with Windrush as well, which I think also got significance as well. We have the Windrush flag done by Bradford Windrush Network, led by Nigel, and there's a whole range of people doing stuff around that. But we have to recognise at the same time that when we did the campaign for National Windrush Day, I just feel that we've just lost a bit of the ownership of that, and that's why I think Windrush 75 is critical, because everyone has a part to play in that. It's not the government, it's not their day, it's our day, and we have to remind the government it's our day, and we have a role to play around co-producing what that day should look like. So I think that's why Windrush 75 is important. We build a network of organisations. We want to influence all the sectors of British society to be involved in that. But we also have to recognise that the scandal is still ongoing. There are survivors of the scandal who are still bitter and angry at how they've been treated by the Home Office. And I've always said on record that Windrush Day is a bittersweet day. It's sweet because it gives up recognition that we deserve. It's bitter because the issues around Windrush have not been completely resolved. Until that's completely resolved, we will have this juxtaposition moving forward. And I just hope that the government, when they pat themselves on the back foot and then the memorial, have an extra commitment and drive to do the right thing to sort out compensation and other issues connected with the scandal, so everyone can fully embrace Windrush Day. That's what we want ultimately, to fully embrace Windrush Day. Up till that point, we've still got more work to do on the make sure that there is justice for the Windrush generation.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm going to bring Siobhan in. Before I do that, can I just mention to attendees, I'll be picking up questions, Q&As from the audience, but you have to write them in the Q&A box and I'll be reading them. That's how to put your questions in. So if you've got something for the panel, put them there. You can also use the chat to tell people who you are, why you're here, what you're doing for Windrush Day, what we should all be doing next year. You can use the chat as well, but if they're questions, put them in the Q&A, please. Siobhan, where is this story for you, and what do you feel we do with it now and next?
Thank you, Sunda. I think, first of all, I want to say, this story, I'm not quite sure it's a story, it's our lives. It matters so much because it is us, it is me. It's fundamentally what has made me me. Without those pioneering people coming over here and leaving everything behind, without my grandparents doing that, I wouldn't exist. So it's not a story, it's life. And I kind of, really want to get that across, especially because if there is anyone watching this, and I think that includes my mother, who knows me, they know how important my granny still is to me. May, she rest in peace. And it's her and her journey and what she decided to do to better her life, to better her family's life, that then carries on in that thread in me to say, what is it that I should be doing today to remember them, to recognize them, to celebrate them, but also embody that resilience, that spirit, that strength, and keep moving forward in that way. I think also overall that the Windrush generation and their stories is a great example of demonstrating as well about the United Kingdom being built on so many people from so many places around the world. That first ship there that were welcoming home those military men is part of this great story of the United Kingdom, of the people that have made it for 1,000 years and continue to come this day to make it and go forward as the United Kingdom. So I think that's why it's also important as well, is it's not just a marker of what happened 75 years ago or that generation who came then. It is also about us today, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, to understand those sacrifices and kind of a duty that we may have, but also to be able to see from the people who are arriving today in this country, why they may be doing it and kind of what we can give them and support them as we continue to develop the United Kingdom. So I am so excited to be looking at what we can do over the next year to really bring in all of those threads to celebrate all of those who came before us and to celebrate where we can go together. And one of the things that for me personally that I get to take forward with this story is, as a trustee of the Black Equity Organisation, is to really use the work that we are doing under the pillars of cultural awareness and representation and respect, and under that pillar of justice and immigration of rights, is to actually continue to push forward, to go beyond maybe a protest or, a call to arms, but actually really embody action that we can take forward, that we can be part of the community and ensure that as a West Indian, Caribbean descent, and for Black people across our country, that we continue to grow and develop and be really strong members of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Siobhan. I think this question about generations is so important, and Michael, I'd be very interested to hear your view of this. Dr. Dwayne Neal of the Reach Society was making a very powerful point in a colourful radio broadcast that Patrick was chairing the other day. He was saying this is now the story of 4 generations in Britain, and so it is the story of the pioneering generation and their children and their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, and that means that we're not having the discussion that was being had in the 1960s, the 1970s about whether people were here to stay or not. We've moved forward, but there's also a challenge with the 74th and 75th anniversary between then and a centenary of making sure the torch is passed on, because it's no longer going to be the living memory of the first generation. It's be what we take from that. How have you found? I know it's important to the work of the Black Heroes Foundation in particular. Is it challenging to get this to resonate across the generations, Michael? How does it work?
It can be challenging only because of vehicles of getting the truth out. Once received, the generations receive it extremely well, are empowered, enlightened, and enthused. And I'll give just one example of the truths that I spoke of. There's a African interesting proverb: until the lions have their own historians, tales of hunting always glorify the hunter. The lions are our windrushers, and their story has never been told truly, but the truth now empowers generations afterwards who are of that descent, and also our indigenous population then views those peoples in a different light. My example will be property. When my father came back to rebuild the mother country, he said, "Son, there were jobs everywhere. You could have any job you wanted. There was work beyond work, beyond work. Over full employment. But the issue was somewhere to live." And we're all aware of the no dogs, there's no blacks, no Irish. And I'm very kind when I say blacks, that's not what the sign said. I think most are aware of that. So finding somewhere to live was the difficulty. People were in shifts in bed. People in the night shift in a job would sleep in the bed in the day. People in the day shifts would be sleeping on the beds, vice versa. My father said this setback actually became a blessing through the partner system they clubbed together, because banks weren't lending the money. My father became the first black mayor of Southwark, and then you went to the council for a mortgage and they told him go back to Jamaica. He wanted to buy a property, they told him go back. He then, through Partner, which is a system of ingenious saving that West Indians did, you save amongst yourselves and you pool money and resources, and one person gets it, every month, for example, or every week. And through that, they were able to buy property. In buying property, they rented rooms. In renting rooms, then they housed friends and families. In housing friends and families, they bought another property. The point I'm coming to is a historical fact. The first Windrushers are property people. They owned more property per capita than the indigenous population. In simple terms, these black foreigners owned 1, 2, and 3 properties, and because they were simple, ordinary rural folk, most of them coming from rural communities, they didn't understand things like flats. We didn't have flats in the Caribbean with a room above, a home dwelling to the left, to the right, underneath, and above. They understood freehold. buying a piece of land with a house on. So that's what they did. They bought freehold houses. So passing on to generations, for me, the fundamental thing is we're the property people. We're the residential property people. It's never been passed on. In my youth, I was told that we're baby mothers, baby fathers, and all sorts of party goers and nonsense, whereas really the truth was we're property people. My aspiration, if I'd have known the total truth, would have been not fast cars and music and loose women. And I'm talking youth, not now. My aspirations would have been multiple properties, freehold. And the banks, if they were following the correct pattern, would have received Caribbean people who were buying properties, had rented properties, proved the abilities to be property holders. The banks would have been far more sympathetic, as they were in later years with the Asian community and corner shops. I deal in banking circles, in finance quite a bit, and that's something that's historically accepted by regional bank managers. If you've had an Asian family come to you and they had one or two corner shops, you've supported them with the other shops. It was never done with Caribbean blacks and property. We're the property people. The Jewish communities, people say are property, but they're generally, and I do a lot of work with the Jewish communities and in property and other areas in clothing and so on. Their areas are semi-commercial. They're like commercial with residential. Their focus is always commercial. So the truth needs to be told, passing on to generations. I'd say to our young generations, your legacy, first and foremost, your property people. Second, your hard-working people and education people. My father went to night school, all his brothers and sisters who came, cousins, relatives, he enrolled everybody in night school. So education was important. So education, property, and then the last thing, absolute hard work. There were derogatory sayings around when I was a youth, work like a black and work like an N-word. This denoted the Windrush's generation's propensity for hard and continual constant work, all the overtime taken, all the work where they worked hard. And this is lost in translation. These are the things I pass on to these later generations, our youth, our children, our children's children. And I think it's a fantastic legacy to pass on if they know the truth. They'll operate very differently in life today if they know that's their legacy.
Thank you, Michael. And Siobhan, listening to Michael's account of the barriers people face, there's a real challenge there, I think, in terms of what is the balance to strike between the progress we've made that is significant and the gaps that remain in terms of equity and equality.
I think it is really important to understand how far we have come, and the reason for that is not in terms of to be like, okay, that's it, great, we're done, give ourselves like a round of applause, United Kingdom, but it's actually to recognize also that we can keep going too, that we can keep breaking down the barriers. And I think that when we're in dialogue with the Indigenous group or those who run our institutions, it is also important to be able to frame things well. If you're just coming in with the bat and ball, I think it doesn't create the right balance in terms of saying, great, we've done a lot, but guess what, we've still got a lot more to do, and we can do this because we've already proven that we can do it. So let's get on, let's be positive, let's be proactive, and also, recognize that things aren't always great, but they can definitely always be better.
Thanks. Patrick, a couple of the first questions we've got relate to the question about the different meanings of Windrush Day and who is it for and who is it about. And Laura Oyadele says, she's frustrated Windrush is predominantly told as a Caribbean story. Many Africans came at the same time to do the same sort of work, repairing and rebuilding what they considered to be the mother country. That's her point about that. And of course, later on, there's a large rise of African migration. And so the Black British population has many roots. And Jill Rutter asked the question, can and should Windrush 75 be a day that marks the contribution of all migrants in the making of modern Britain? So there are the other Commonwealth stories from Asia. There's non-Commonwealth migration from Ireland happening in parallel, sometimes facing the same signs that Michael was telling us, reminding us of. Who's Windrush Day about, Patrick?
Interesting, because it's very contentious because people have got different takes on Windrush Day. Some people see it as a Jamaican thing. Some people see it as a Caribbean thing. Some people see it as a South London thing. So there's different takes. I mean, my perspective, I have a very holistic approach. And Lara, who I know very well, she's come September, she's going to be the first president of CIH, the Chartered Institute of Housing, first Black woman, the first person of colour to have that key role. So, Lara, we expect you to be involved with Windrush 75, representing the housing sector. So I'm going to get you wrapped up in that. So I recognise the African contribution, people coming from Africa, because the Windrush ship could have left Sierra Leone, it could have left Ghana, Niger, anywhere along the west coast of Africa, it could have left. But for some reason, by historical design, or maybe Michael King might say by God, debate, it chose that ship that made a historic journey from Jamaica in May 1948. But it could have come from any part of the Commonwealth. And actually, to be fair, there were other ships, we know that. Ships before and after, and as well. So I have a very open, holistic perspective. I see Windrush firstly recognising that Caribbean contribution, recognising that African contribution. But I think for Windrush 75, and when we were campaigning for National Windrush Day, we recognised that this was an opportunity to acknowledge the contribution of migrants as well. Because without all the migrant contribution to Britain, there would be no G or great in Britain. We know that. So I think Windrush 75 is really, really important on different levels. And as you said, Sunda, Windrush 75 will be the last time when the Windrush generation will be around to celebrate this significant year. I look at my family. My dad's going to be 91 in a few weeks' time. My mum's in her 80s. And they may not be around for the next significant Windrush event 10 years later, the next 11 years. That also applies to some of us. I mean, a lot of people died during the pandemic. A lot of Windrush generation died during the pandemic too. So I think we should use Windrush 75 not just simply to acknowledge the Windrush generation, but to acknowledge our contribution to Britain, which often never gets valued, never gets respected. And this is an opportunity for us to land that. So I want major institutions in Britain, in the United Kingdom, to do something significant in their sectors to acknowledge this contribution. This is really, really important that everyone on this call, in terms of your contacts, your connections, your influences, make sure that Windrush 75 lands. I mean, obviously, we can't compare. Obviously, just recently we had the Platinum Jubilee. I don't think we've got a budget of £28 million, folks, but it'd be nice to have half of that at least. But at least everyone celebrated and recognised the Platinum. And obviously there were elements of Windrush celebrations and recognition throughout the Platinum Jubilee events recently, but let's lance Windrush 75 in a significant way.
So many people associate with this history from different perspectives, and it's definitely an origin story for the Black Caribbean community in Britain, and the monument is to the generation that arrived from 1948 to 1971, 73. I think, and it's a symbolic moment of the start of Commonwealth migration from all the way across the Commonwealth, and now it's the history of Britain. And I think part of the challenge here is how to establish that, Black history is British history, and that the history of empire and Commonwealth and decolonisation and migration is British history. Michael, what's been your experience of whether you can have all of those meanings or whether you have to choose between them?
I think the key, really, you said the one word that underpins it is education. And I think going forward, looking at education, our big push in the Windrush Foundation is to get Windrush into secondary schools. We have it in primary schools. And I think when education happens through the nation, then the whole outlook and the whole viewpoint changes and takes a different perspective. And then the major powers that be, and the bodies that Patrick has alluded to, has been mentioned by Siobhan, the changes come through that lovely word of education. Again, it's truth telling. Am I answering your question correctly? Am I moving in the right direction?
Yeah. Thank you. Siobhan, here's a question that's been asked, and I can't quite see the name on it. It's Fatma Suisi says, my question is, do you think that the Black British minority is symbolically reclaiming its full position as British citizens through the process of rewriting history by commemorating Windrush and renaming streets, removing colonial statues, BLM protests, and so on? Is that something you recognise, or would you see different strands in that approach?
I think that there are lots of differences, which is probably why you've asked me this question, Sunda. Reclaiming, I struggle with reclaiming your history, as in there is nothing to reclaim. Maybe we need to remind ourselves, yes, but we don't need to reclaim it. We are it. We are the living embodiment of what came before. So I kind of, sometimes, it's great that we ensure that British history in its widest of contexts is taught in school, but it's also important that we amongst ourselves talk about our history, that whichever generation reminds the next generation, or even reminds ourselves and the older generation about, our history. And therefore we live it. It's part of us, and it helps shape us maybe as we go forward. Do I think that kind of tearing up the book that was written as it was is productive? Quite frankly, no, I don't. Sorry to everyone else there who does. I don't. I think what is really important, again, is to learn that, take that, understand that contextually with all of the other things that we are discovering today, as the Reverend Michael, talked about at the beginning. It's the more that we add on, it's those layers, the additional color, the additional flavor, the individual stories, as well as the societal ones and the institutional ones, that actually creates that fuller understanding both of the past and of the present.
I'm interested in this because this could be a kind of framing and communications question, that if we include and expand rather than remove and take away, we might take more people with us. But it might also be a substantive question about what we're doing. So like you, I've got a bit of a bias towards, shifting the argument from the statues we take down to the statues we put up, because you can do more, I think, that way. But is that about communication, or is that a different content about what the new history is for you, Siobhan?
So it's definitely both, because communicating for communicating's sake without the actual substance, it is a bit kind of neither here nor there, and it doesn't add value. It doesn't help us learn more. One of the things I kind of say as well, keep the statue and make sure that there is a bigger piece of information there right next to it to understand more about it, to provide context. I think that taking in particular certain people of the past who are very, very questionable, when you then look at the other things that they had did, the contributions that they made in other ways to society, kind of shows that all of us as human beings are 360. We're not one nor t'other, and actually we also have to recognize that in terms of how do we feel also about ourselves and what we're doing today.
Thanks. Patrick, did you have something to say about these different approaches to changing the way we think about history?
Yeah, I think it's not just simply about having a curriculum, Windrush, and legacy of migration in schools. It's actually how we do stuff around even healthcare, because again, Wendy Williams in their Lessons Learned Review report made a recommendation that all civil servants need to be educated because that would make better policy making when it comes to immigration migration policy. Because if they have an ignorance of the Windrush generation and the history of other migrant communities coming to Britain, they make bad policy, and we know that because of the hostile environment situation. So it's not simply about schools, it's about educating people in key roles, decision-making roles in the NHS, in local governments, in the housing sector, in the media, etc., etc. So it's about the educating and informing. I think that's really, really important on that level. But also, the other issue connected with education is resources and materials, because you need to have resources and materials to educate and inform. So obviously, there's a whole range of books have come out really from the time of the days of Margaret Busby, who was one of the most successful Black women publishers back in the early 70s. And there have been seminal books and publications that have come out to give different aspects of history, migration, identity, and belonging as well. The campaign I did all those years ago, 100 Great Black Britons, played its role. There have been other campaigns. You've got the Black Curriculum, led by Lavina Stennett, and a whole range of other people, Willoughby Trust, and a whole range of organisations trying to influence that as well, the work of British Futures as well. So we've all got a part to play in that. I think part of the challenge that we have is the kind of cultural wars that we're caught up in, these manufactured wars that you have a choice. You either it's this history or that history. You can't have both, basically. And we've got to educate politicians ultimately as well. So and that has to start again with the schools as well. So we've got a lot to do still. But I think when Windrush 75, as Michael said, ironically, more people learned about the history of the Windrush generation through the scandal than all the BBC TV programmes and ITV programmes and all the stuff that's been put together the last 60 years, ironically.
Yeah, so there's the impact of the scandal. Now, I think what you said is very important there, Patrick, that history is about what we teach in schools. It's very important to get that right. But public history is about a lot of other things, what's on the television, what's in the books, what's in the newspapers, what the National Health Service or the football clubs could do to tell us our history. And so we've got a couple of comments that relate to this. Meg Henry from the Linking Network, she says that obviously education is a strong way forward and schools respond highly positively and will want to teach this story, relates to what Michael's saying, especially if we can collectively provide and share excellent, authentic lesson and assembly resources. So I think part of that question is often we debate what is the curriculum, what isn't in the curriculum, but the curriculum's quite varied these days and not everyone follows it. But what the resources are available and aren't available is very important. Another question from Steve Ballinger. He's saying that it's 50 years, on the 50th anniversary, the BBC broadcast and Trev Phillips' big documentary, it really put the Windrush story in public attention much higher. What can the BBC or other major broadcasters do with the 75th anniversaries? We've got a question about what the schools need and a question about what we should really be seeing projected by our national broadcaster. Michael, what's your take on those questions?
I think this platform is a good example of what should be done. We're preparing now for next year. We're preparing now to, as Patrick said, we won't have the Jubilee budget, but let's have a massive impact. And a massive positive impact, and it should be something that is on all the media platforms that the media has been receiving and thinking of and looking at on the way up, even permeating things as obscure as an EastEnders story around it and things of that nature, because it's that far-reaching that it's touching everywhere, as well as being on BBC World Service or Radio 5 Live. Those are the standard areas, but it's permeated in such a way that this truth that I spoke of has now come out and becoming a part of British fabric of society. Our voices are heard. This wonderful truth contribution is being told, and our tremendous Windrush generation are being recognised, and the descendants are being recognised. I think if we're all making the voice in all the areas that are being mentioned with a big push for the 75th, it's very hard to ignore not just UK. This is worldwide. Let's understand we're in a new age. I'm not the most technological man in the world, but I do realise that social media today, we say something here and it's received worldwide. We're in that position now that it's not only a UK sound and positive sound around Windrush, we have the opportunity for a big worldwide positive noise. I think it can be tremendous. And as long as, look, these Windrushers, they prayed. And that's why every setback was turned into a leap forward. Everything that I would say the enemy meant for bad was turned for good. And by that, I mean, you know, all the immigration negatives, not buying houses and so on and so forth. And you won't last 5 summers, we're still here. All the positives that have come. And then I mentioned the negatives again of the situation with this horrendous Windrush scandal. Well, it became a good publicity point. So for me, God will turn it around in an incredible way. All we have to do is play our little parts. So our little part is to then be that clarion voice, be that foghorn everywhere, be that mouthpiece, be that oracle for the situation everywhere that we can, in every modern vehicle that we can use, the Snapchat, social media, the this, the that, the other, and then watch the change in the world because of our Windrush Day. So I'm looking forward greatly to it.
Thank you, Michael. And let's take the message everywhere. EastEnders is now on the list for storyline. I'm going to add the Archers as well. We can get Windrush 75 on the Archers.
Absolutely.
Siobhan, what would you prioritise either in the schools or on the national broadcasters?
Kind of, it sounds a bit trite to say, but individual stories, I think, are so important to get communicated. We're so quick to go to the big broad brush statements and, you know, and those sound bites that we can use. And actually, you know, most people are focused on their family, their world, you know, their jobs, etc. So in fact, by mirroring that, talking about, you know, our forefathers, but also us today, bringing in those individual stories, getting those, even if it's like a 3-minute little thing thrown out across the BBC network and across all of its different platforms, I think is so important. And also hearing about the people we don't normally hear about is so important, because it is the you and me, and yet there are amazing stories to be told that resonate directly. And then also, yeah, I've just seen in the comments, you know, get Windrush on a banknote, and then yeah, let's go for something big and have, whether it's, you know, the big broadcaster or the big newspaper, actually support something like Windrush on a banknote, or, you know, that big shouty thing that we can also say is us, is ours, and represents who we are.
That's great. I think the power of personal stories is very important. The thing I'd like to see the BBC do, which I think only the BBC could do with all of its who do we think we are resources and so on, I like to see them get that passenger list and go down 3 and 4 generations. You find out all sorts of things about Britain. There'd be some surprises in who is 3 or 4 generations from the Windrush. And we have a question about a related point here from Catherine Bickersteth, and she says, out of many one people, as stated on the Jamaican crest, which itself was designed by the British, not Jamaicans, I am of mixed heritage. She said, I was born and grew up in England. I have one remaining Jamaican relative living in London. So for me, she says, Windrush 75 should be about people recognizing the history, and that we're a very mixed society and we have a hugely enriched culture. And so I hope all of those of us who are mixed heritage can place ourselves in their individual identities, not have to choose a side. And as an educator, she wants the curriculum to include the whole of the stories. So Windrush should be about Britain having settlers across centuries, not just since Windrush. But this was a group, the Black Caribbean group, that in terms of, you know, we ask people to integrate, that knew they were British a generation or 2 before the society understood that. And then the level of mixing of this group meant that the group is an incredibly integrated and mixed group in terms of who their grandchildren are. And maybe that's something that people aren't as aware of as they might be. Patrick, any response to that question from Catherine?
Yeah, in terms of the question response to Catherine, the point I was going to make about what we should do is how I got into Windrush was my passion, family genealogy and family history. So going back to what Siobhan was saying about collecting those personal stories, it's important. So, so like with Catherine, the point she's making about she's got a family history connected with the Caribbean, connected with Windrush, and it's about recording those, capture those stories to share, not with family members, but with others. I mean, so I've done a lot of research work tracing my family history in the Caribbean to eventually I've traced my roots to Senegal. But also I've done a lot of research work trying to capture some of the histories of the Windrush generation. One of the things I did do, I made a documentary called Charmed Life about the life of Eddie Martin Noble, who served in the Second World War, same as Sam King as well. Whereas with Sam, he was demobbed back in the Caribbean and came on the Windrush ship. Eddie actually stayed on in Britain and had and had a family here. So there's different stories which are not captured. I mean, I think Andrews Levy's Small Islands really is still a powerful seminal novel which has captured that backstory of Windrush. Tony Fairweather, a good friend of mine, he's just got a book out just recently about the Windrush ship itself and what happened on the Windrush ship. It's a cross between EastEnders and Blinky Blinders. I hope that we made into a TV series. I think it'd be quite interesting as well. But I think family history, family genealogy is important. One of the urges I would love to see happen is a project where grandchildren and great-grandchildren interview their parents and grandparents and start to do that. I mean, if I compare us to the American experience around this history side of things, in the Library of Congress, they've got all the slave narratives of first-hand, second-hand accounts of people's experiences in deep South America around the experiences of Jim Crow and slavery. It'd be fantastic to have a national depository of thousands or tens of thousands of Windrush stories from the Caribbean, from Africa and elsewhere as a national depository, because that will form the foundation, which has done in America, for educational resources, for academic research, etc. We haven't got that critical mass yet, but I think that would be a powerful prosperity for the future.
That's a great idea, and we have some support in the chat. And the questions of Al Graham in Haringey says it's so important to get the testimonies. But I think that point, that gathering the testimonies that we get and working out all of the things that we can that we can do. So some really interesting ideas here. Now, another comment comes from Birmingham, from LJ Hunter, says, thank you, panel, for this. And there's just a little criticism of something you've said here, Patrick, in a very friendly way, which is to just question the comparison to Martin Luther King Day and just say that we might lose our way if we talk about America, because this is the story of Britain and we're British because of the Windrush generation. And so the preferred analogy here is with St. George's Day and St. David's Day and St. Patrick's Day and St. Andrew's Day, but we need to just get that there. So I think it's a very constructive challenge, but the British story and the American story are different stories, and that's part of the story of Windrush. How would you respond to that, Patrick?
Yeah, I mean, of course, there was a British story, but the reason why I said Martin Luther King Day, because Martin Luther King Day was established when people had campaigned for that day, by the way, but it took 20, 30 years to establish Martin Luther King Day. I think Stevie Wonder's song about Martin Luther King helped to land it in terms of Congress. But the whole idea of Martin Luther King Day is not simply just about Martin Luther King, even though it's quite important, about his seminal work. It's how he saw the people of America, I Have a Dream, all that kind of stuff. It's also about celebrating multi-ethnic, multicultural America. It's part of that process as well, and that's why I was doing that comparison. So yes, a lot of African Americans see Martin Luther King as a hero, but a lot of Americans see Martin Luther King as a hero as well. Hispanics, as well as white people, who name it. And I think with Windrush has inspired. I think people don't understand the impact of Windrush. Windrush has inspired Britain. It's not just simply when people came off the ship and they, as Michael described, they had to make the success of what they were doing. Windrush has influenced music, fashion, art, culture, politics. It brought, I mean, people described Britain in the 1950s as dull, two-tone. We brought this vibrancy to Britain. And I would love to have an economic survey. I mean, I'd love to commission, maybe we should do it, Sunda, commission a piece of work to look at the social cost benefit analysis of Windrush. If we did that, we would find the true contribution and true legacy, not just simply around the individuals, not just on the ship, but everyone that's been in Britain between post-Second World War up to the 90s. And if you took all the Windrush contributions out of Britain, Britain would just be like poor. Bad. Poor.
Thanks, Patrick. Let me bring Michael in on this point. I wondered if you had any particular response to the point about the interethnic mixing across generations that is a big legacy of Windrush, and how we recognise and mark that. I've also got several people saying that they like your point about the war contribution, the service, that people are rebuilding the post-war economy, but they're coming because of that other connection. But another question that's being asked is, how could the employers that were most important to some of that story, which was transport and health and business and so on, how might they be involved now in recognising this 75 years on?
I think trade unions have been very good in making a vocal comment of the contribution of the Windrush generation. Excuse me. They haven't hidden in the background when the struggle for black recognition, black, trying to think of the right words, really black history to take its correct place. Trade unions have been very supportive in the past 20, 30 years. So when we talk about the workplace, a union support is one, and then we go to the management positions, and management has taken on a whole new approach in business management. CBI and places like this are very productivity related, and productivity has a broad spectrum in that you have to kind of understand where you've come from and rewrite some of your interactions. So business at the head needs to change, and corporations at the head, as I think was mentioned by Patrick, is not just training in schools, it's right across the board. And I think those changes can bring big noise for us going forward and happening. But I happen to see one comment about the church and the Windrush generation and their effect on the church. Look, this is an amazing thing for me. Our churches, majority black churches, are on a phenomenal upsurgence. In the last 10 years, the growth has been continual. Majority white churches, and this is not a black-white thing. Remember, I say majority. I didn't say black churches, and I said majority white. I'm not saying white. There's a decline. I was at a lovely meeting with Premier Radio in the House of Lords just a few days ago around radio going forward and things that they want to do. And one of the things that was noted was mainstream white church in a decline. Churches that are more integrated and black-based are on phenomenal increases. And from the Windrush generation, understand, these were all praying people. These were Christian people, inverted commas. They're very rare to get people who weren't praying to the Lord for deliverance through what they're going for. So in what you're saying, and in the aspects of business in every area, I think the church has a phenomenal part to play, and we've been very quiet. And it's time to stand up, step up, support our Windrush generation, of course, share the gospel in a new way, share love, God's love, share the aspect of community that church brings, share what has happened with the Windrush generation and church with our modern today church. There's a whole leap forward, and just us on Zoom's an example again. We don't meet as we used to, yet we also meet as we used to. So going forward, opportunity is phenomenal. Church can do a lot more, and I'm looking for us in this year as a church body to support what Windrush decides to do, foundation, various organizations, the platform we're on now. I'm looking forward to the body of Christ making a massive impact in supporting what's happening.
So Faith will want to acknowledge the Windrush generation. We have seen major national commemorations and so on. And as you say, it's also, and as the questioner says, it's also a complex story about, rejection in some ways in that first generation, as well as the legacy going forward. But the contribution of faith is very important. We've also had some support for you, Patrick. You'll be glad to hear about the American reference, because Juanita Cox wants to say that, the Black British population has always been transnational in its inspirations and its allegiances and its links and so on. And so it's a very relevant reference. And I think this is one of the interesting challenges, really, that the British story of empire and decolonization and Commonwealth and race is a different story to the American story. But of course, there are inspirations coming from America in different generations and at different times as well. So, and not being London-centric is being mentioned. The London Transport Museum has had a Legacies of the Caribbean Workforce exhibition this year. So I think people who have, I think it's been recognised more. The RAF has done some things, but I think the RAF should do an enormous amount for Windrush 75. We'll have to find out how they're getting on with that. Taking it beyond London is something that has happened to the Windrush story, I'm sure, but perhaps something that could happen more. Siobhan's a great stramash of themes coming up. And what I'd like to say to the audience as well as questions, which we welcome. If in the chat you just want to tell us the thing you'd most like to see, we can collect more of these ideas. We've probably got too many ideas already, but more ideas can never be harmful with a year to go. And everybody else can do their bit as well. It's the health service, transport, and so on. Siobhan, any reflections on the things people have been sharing?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I can see from what everyone's saying is that there is a wish, a desire for us to represent all of our identity, let's say, whether that's in terms of, our mixed heritage or in terms of where we are located, where we grew up, and that side of the story too. And it is so important that when we talk of Windrush and we reflect on that generation, that actually we bring in all of these different strands of family, of background, of also religion. Whilst on the whole, most of us from the Caribbean are, of course, Christian, as Reverend Michael put it. There are those of other religions as well who came here through at that same time. And of course, it isn't just about the Caribbean, as much as I'm definitely biased towards it because that's my family, but it is about all of us. And I think that, looking at the comments that were raised, it is so important that we do remember these things and we find that thread that links it all. So all of us actually have ownership of Windrush 75.
That's great. And so it's plural. We're not trying to control it. If it happens in lots of places, we can reflect all of the meanings. How is the spreading of the Windrush participation beyond London going? I mean, Brixton, Patrick, has Windrush Square since the 50th anniversary because it's a very central part of the story, but it's an important story in lots of cities and towns.
I think there's lots of things happening outside London, not just in England, but also in Wales and Scotland as well. And, with the last few months, we've organised this Windrush Network meeting. We've had people coming from, I can see some people online, got Claude from Leeds, we've got people from Bradford, Liverpool, Manchester, other parts South East of England as well. Everyone's doing their stuff around how they could do stuff around Windrush. And if we could, again, going back to Windrush 75 for next year, if we can make it truly a four-nation range of activities and programs, that'd be fantastic. So, so it's not like you or I are determining this. It's all of us. We all have our responsibility to play in terms of having regional events, having events in Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland as well. I think it's really, really critical. I know in Wales, they've organised quite a few Windrush events over the last few years. and I've been involved in attending and supporting that. So I think it's recognising that this history, it's a foreign nation history as well. I think that's quite important. I think the NHS is quite critical. There is an umbilical cord between Windrush and the NHS because the NHS needed our labour and it still does need our labour. So I think it's important how the NHS commemorates not only the 75th anniversary of Windrush next year, but the 75th anniversary of the NHS. And when it came to the 70th anniversary of NHS, I was involved working with NHS colleagues. I've been working at NHS, been a former NHS manager myself. We helped to organise events, and I think I know that I was at the NHS Confederation Conference last week in Liverpool, and I was speaking to some NHS colleagues. They want to get involved with us and sit down together to see what we could do. The Race and Health Observatory, which is part of NHS Confederation, they want to work with us to see what we could do, maybe on the eve of the NHS conference next year, that we could have a Windrush event of some sort to recognise the link between NHS and Windrush.
And it's such a close link, isn't it? I mean, they're a fortnight apart, the birthday of the NHS and the docking of the Windrush, but all the stories of migration from the Windrush generation directly and from all of the rest of the Commonwealth. I mean, that resonates with me because my dad came on a plane from India and my mum came on a ferry from Cork in Ireland, but they met through the NHS as a doctor and nurse. So the story of the 3/4 of a century of the NHS is inextricably linked. Got a very nice story from LJ Hunter in Birmingham, who says they nominated Mr. Albert Jarrett to serve as a baton bearer for the Commonwealth Games, and Albert Jarrett is I think 96 years old, born 98 years old, even born in Jamaica, and part of that World War II generation. So that's a very strong example of the legacy outside of London being recognised and being celebrated. So interested to get people's further thoughts on the things that could and should happen. One question that's come up again, and there's another question about these balances of different stories. Lara's question is, what about the compensation scheme? And Michael, how do we get this balance between the big story of 4 generations and contribution, the fact that we're doing some of this because the scandal woke people up, but the scandal isn't over? How do you recognise that?
I think we push the main story, and then the scandal will get dealt with as the main story perpetuates, increases and grows. You've mentioned the Mr. Jarrett there, and I think Patrick and Siobhan have said it's time to fully document everybody as quickly as possible, because we're not sure who's going to be where when in a year's time. My father had a lovely saying in his latter 20 years. They'd ask him if he'd do something next month, and he says, "If I live, I'll be there with you." And they'd all go, "Oh, you'll live." Till one day he didn't. But for many years he said that statement. I find myself saying that statement. If I live to next year, it's going to be an awesome year in terms of Windrush. But when I think of our Windrush's original travellers who are around, as has been mentioned, we can't say with any statistical certainty they'll be there. I think it's very urgent that their voices are lifted up now. Now, in terms of compensation scheme, all those voices, these regal 96, 95, 97, 89-year-olds who have made phenomenal contributions to King and Country, Queen and Country, and to the generations behind them, these voices at the end would say things that I've heard said. It's shocking that our country has treated our people who have been treated so unjustly are continued to be treated unjustly. I think it's comments like that from people like them would change the attitude of the powers that be to do something. I will make noise. The church en masse should be making noise, and it's not just church in London. I'm saying the national church should be making noise about injustices of this nature. That I think when people of the ilk of whom we've mentioned then speak, these great Windrusher originals speak, and they're speaking the same story in the same way, with the same dignity and the same surprise that it's not been dealt with correctly already. It's shameful. It is shocking, and it is a worldwide story. So I think main focus, let's do what we're doing and really push for next year. But alongside, of course, the compensation scene needs to be highlighted. And I think as we go forward, that highlight will bring the necessary change.
Great. So thanks for those comments, and that's a very important way to balance. And it is, I think, the fact that it was the anniversary of Windrush that really helped the system break through as well. Patrick, any thoughts?
Yeah, any thoughts on that? Yeah, I mean, I was interviewed by Nadine White for the Independent, so I've given my comments what I think about what should happen. So in a nutshell, even though it's great that we're still commemorating Windrush Day and the launch of various memorial statues taking place in the next 24 hours, we can't forget the scandal. I think it's quite important. I'll say it's bittersweet because it's sweet because it's recognition, the recognition of those pioneers who have not been given the due recognition that they deserve. But it's bitter because of the Windrush. It's just a plea. I just hope that the government, when they pat themselves on the back tomorrow and say we've done this, just to seriously look at themselves and say, what more can we do to make sure that the Windrush generation needs are met? I would love to see Priti Patel have a meeting, a high-level meeting at number 10 with a number of survivors so she can hear their stories firsthand, not second-hand, third-hand, or fourth-hand, but directly, so she can understand why she needs to seriously reconsider her decision for the compensation scheme to be moved from the Home Office to an independent agency where people have that trust and confidence. That's what people want, trust and confidence. And the second thing, which I think is quite important, is about a lot of the survivors are suffering from post-traumatic stress. They've got a whole range of health problems. They need urgent, direct support for their health and mental health needs. Even if it means that we have to pay them to go to the private sector to get an MOT. The mortality rate is going down badly. So this is part of the stuff that needs to be resolved properly, compensation and a proper health check for those who've been caught up in the scandal. And then we can properly, truly have a Windrush Day because everyone will be sorted. And then in terms of what Priti Patel says about right and the wrongs. Right and the wrongs is not simply saying to and giving PR messages that we've given you money. It's more than just that. It's about that proper recognition which they deserve. And then we can truly celebrate Windrush Day. That's what we want to do. I mean, I campaigned for Windrush Day with a whole range of people. I got caught in campaigning during the scandal. So I'm in this personal position of wanting Windrush Day to work, but knowing that I have to still be on the side of the Windrush survivors because they've not been heard or taken seriously. So let's use Windrush Day for reconciliation. Let's use Windrush Day for acknowledgement. And let's use Windrush Day as a way to repair the harm that's been caused for many.
Thank you, Patrick. So a year to go, Windrush Eve today, a day to go for this year's anniversary, more recognition than ever before. We've had lots of excellent contributions today, some very practical questions being asked. Will there be a national calendar so people can see things city to city? There's a new social media feed at 75 Windrush, which will keep people in touch. There's going to be an email list as well. There are regular forum meetings. So do get in touch with us on social media or email in or contact us. How can unions and other organisations support Windrush 75? Or someone from the National Education at the NEU, and so that's something that we'd like to talk to people about as well as we just establish these points. Just like to give a final word to each of our panelists. Any final thoughts on the conversation, or the thing that you'd most like to see some civic energy put into as we take on all of these opportunities to keep building this recognition? Siobhan.
Thanks. I think in terms of the opportunities going forward is we do need exactly what everyone is calling for. We need a national conversation about ourselves, right? And what it is to be British today, and, you know, how seminal these really big moves of migration being called to the mother country are, and the impact and importance that that has on who we are today, the look, the feel, the smell of United Kingdom. And so I hope that every institution, every school, every community group, you know, just neighbours on a street will actually use this next year as an opportunity to get to know each other, understand our backstories, and really reflect on who we are. And then we can have a great big old party next year.
That's great. Now, just a message we've had from Julie Siddiqui, who says she's very supportive of this effort. She notes that she's white, Muslim, and lives in Slough. And she says she's done her bit for this because she's got the Thought for the Day slot tomorrow morning and has spoken about Windrush Day on it sometime between 7 and 8 o'clock if people want to listen to that. So thank you, Julie, for your support of that. Patrick, what would you like to see the focus on here?
I think we've explored a whole range of things about what institutions can do, what we can do, etc. I think one of the key things in the context of as we're coming out of the pandemic and the whole ongoing conversation of Black Lives Matter, and it's great that BEO has been established to play a key role around fighting for racial equity, there's lots of fantastic projects out there in the community that support the Windrush generation, from luncheon clubs to supporting people complete Windrush compensation forms, to day centres, to educational and learning, intergenerational dialogue with young people. And I hope that philanthropists and funders can actually give more funding to support these activities, which support directly into Windrush generation groups, but also to support the legacy of Windrush as well through ongoing projects and funding as well. You did a report a few years ago that we have lost a lot of community assets in the community. So it's about how we preserve some, and going back to the point that Michael was talking about at the very beginning, that the pioneers were property people, but we need to have community assets to do future work. If you're going to tackle issues around health and well-being, having more stuff around housing. If you look at the housing associations that were established in the 50s, they were done by the Windrush generation. Some of them now have got turnovers of a couple £100 million. We've lost that energy around entrepreneurship and creativity. It's there because I see what a lot of young people are doing, but we need to have more resources to build the capacity as we come out of the pandemic.
Thank you, Patrick. And I hope everyone will keep in touch with us. You're all invited to join the Windrush 75 network. We've got the British Futures helping coordinate and support it with Patrick. We've got dozens of organisations involved working together and helping people take this to different networks, as you've offered to do. So do keep in touch and let us know how you are, what you're doing that can be amplified and what you'd like to connect up on. Michael, I'm going to give you the last word for tonight. It's Windrush Eve. We've got a special Windrush Day tomorrow with the National Memorial. We've got more hope for the future. I think that recognition is growing. A final word from you. Thank you.
I think my father would be very proud of everything everybody's doing and the changes that are happening and moving in the right direction. But he's a man of challenges. He'd want a bit more, and I join him in wanting more. And the more is somewhat controversial. What I would like to see, just as we had in the Jubilee, as a Christian in Britain, we felt in the last years somewhat marginalised, somewhat attacked. Christianity been taken out of schools in the way it used to be there. Christianity out of workplaces. In certain working environment where we work with social services. When you mention Christianity, it's they get all upset. I have seen phenomenal change with one thing, the Queen's Jubilee. It was said of Her Royal Highness, the one thing she wanted to do was to attend Westminster Abbey to exhibit her faith in worship. very powerful. And then it was said, the Queen is the head of the Church of England, and she is the defender of the faith. These are very powerful to Christian lobbyists and people in Christian organizations like myself. We don't have to hide, we're just like Her Royal Highness. I would like to see Her Royal Highness give her support verbally in some form of statement for Windrush and Windrush Day. It sounds, oh, how can that be? Her chaplain for many years is of the Windrush generation. One of my heroes, the Reverend, or now Bishop Rose Hudson Wilkinson, was the Queen's chaplain and chaplain to the House of Commons. So what I'm saying is not far-fetched. It's very, very possible, and I would say probable, and the royal family has already supported in numerous ways Windrush. But a statement from Her Royal Highness will change the climate in the UK and worldwide phenomenally. I'm hoping and praying and asking for this.
Thank you for those closing remarks. Every citizen, every national institution can play a part in this. That's all of you and everybody up to the royal family itself. So a year to go. Enjoy Windrush Day. Tomorrow, everybody involved in marking it, and do please get involved and let us know how you can help turn this vision into a reality. Thanks very much for joining us tonight. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Siobhan. Thank you, Patrick, for everything you're doing to lead this push. And do please keep in touch. And thanks everybody for attending this tonight. And happy Windrush Day tomorrow. And thank you for all the work everybody is doing. Good night.
Thank you very much.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Happy
Bye.
Windrush
Bye.
Day.
Bless you all. Thank
Bye.
you, Joy. Patrick, I'll probably see you all in the morning.
Yeah, I will do. I'll see you there. Definitely around there as well. I forgot to talk about the Anchor project, but that's another conversation. Don't worry.
Yes. Yeah. Well,
Gosh.